rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times. Star Wars #1!
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Well, I suppose while we're waiting on the Star Wars that will be, with Andor Season 2 coming up, and of course, news that seems to pop up here and there now about the new Mandalorian and Grogu movie, while we anticipate all of that, we can look back at some of the Star Wars that never was. The Star Wars that was meant to be. That seems to be a theme this week here on Rebel Force Radio. Great show ahead, so please strap in, hang out with us for the next couple of hours as we deliver the best in Star Wars conversation found anywhere today. So a little bit of a theme here, not exactly planned out, but it's just the news cycle where Rick McCallum is resurfaced on another podcast to talk more details about Star Wars Underworld. That was the big, massive, epic TV project that he was working on with George Lucas and guys like Ronald D. His name's going to come up later in the program. Of course, we all as Star Wars fans know about what might have been with Underworld. These were the famous scripts that now sit on a shelf somewhere. Or do they really? We'll get it from Rick McCallum later on in the program. Plus another might have been, could have been, Star Wars Detours. Again, another project involving the maker himself, George Lucas, with comedian, producer, actor Seth Green. So Seth has recently talked about that project and why it's likely to never see the light of day. Plus, more on the Rey film. It does continue to be in what we're calling here on Rebel Force Radio developmental hell. So, but don't get down in the dumps. We've got an incredible season of Andor coming in just a few weeks, and it's going to be epic. It's going to be a movie of the week, and Rebel Force Radio and our after show is going to be here every week, bringing it to you with our live coverage and phone calls, and it's just going to be, I can't wait for that. But looking back on this stuff that might have been, could have been, would have been, is going to be a heck of a lot of fun. So hope you enjoy the show as much as we like putting it together for you. And by we, I mean, of course, if introductions are in order, my name is Jason, and with me, as always, my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Back in the saddle again for more Star Wars conversation. And I am really looking forward to breaking down some of these new revelations about Star Wars Underworld via Rick McCallum. And we even have some stuff about Star Wars Detours via interview comments from Seth Green and much more. But first, we are very excited to present you with an announcement. Announcement. We have an announcement. An announcement that you've been waiting for.
That's a drum roll.
A lot of people have been asking, is there going to be a live RFR event in 2025? Well, we're happy to let you know it's official. RFR Live will be happening in 2025. And it's going to be happening at a place that's been on my bucket list as far as locations to podcast from, with a live audience. Yes, Rancho Obi-Wan. RFR Live at Rancho Obi-Wan. I cannot wait. So it's happening September 6th at Rancho Obi-Wan in Petaluma, California. Join us at the museum that houses the Guinness Book of World Records' largest collection of Star Wars memorabilia, the home of Stephen J. Sansweet, good friend of ours here at RFR. He will be our host as we host a live RFR podcast from the Rancho Obi-Wan Museum grounds. And I am so psyched, Jason. Talk about something that has been years in development.
Yeah, literally. It's been years. A bucket list thing to do something live at Rancho. I mean, we've been out to Rancho. You've been out there many times. I've been out there a couple times. And but never like this. This is something completely different.
Yeah. So it's happening Saturday, September 6th. The museum will be open. The video arcade will be turned on. The general store will be open.
And that's where you'll find Jimmy Mac, by the way. If you're looking for him, he'll be in the arcade.
If I'm not behind the microphone, odds are pretty strong that I'll be at the flippers of that Star Wars Episode 1 pinball machine. No problem. Man, that is my favorite spot on the entire property, is that video arcade. But I'm so excited about this. It's a tax-deductible portion of your ticket will support Rancho Obi-Wan's initiative to build the Saga Museum. And quite honestly, just about all the proceeds are going directly to Rancho Obi-Wan for this big event. So we want to see you there. It's going to be a great night. It's going to be an intimate affair with Rebel Force Radio and a cast of hundreds. I'm so excited. I'm almost speechless just thinking about it. So save the date.
Taking a pilgrimage. Yep. I mean, this is for Star Wars fans. You know, everyone talks about, the ranch this, the ranch that. And I think there was a time under the reign of George Lucas where that was Mecca. But I feel like that's a long time ago in another galaxy. Rancho Obi-Wan is really Mecca for Star Wars fans and has been really since it opened. So this is the pilgrimage. You get to come hang out with us there at Rancho Obi-Wan, something we've never done before. And with all the changes happening in the future, we don't know what the future holds with the big project and the merging of the collections. This might be the last shot to hang out with Rebel Force Radio at the current Rancho Obi-Wan.
Absolutely. It's, time is a fleeting thing, and you got to jump on opportunity when it presents itself to you, or you have to make the opportunity happen on your own. And I think this event is a combination of both, but we're really excited to be working with Steve Sansweet and Newman and the crew at Rancho Obi-Wan to, go home to my spiritual home. My Star Wars spiritual home is Rancho Obi-Wan. And I am so excited to be there in a situation where we can share the museum and share our podcast with an audience of Rebel Force Radio listeners. The plan is to put tickets on sale probably later this spring. I'm thinking sometime maybe late May.
We want to give people plenty of time to plan because we know that for a large portion of the country and the population, that's a big trip. And we want you to be able to have all the time in the world to make it a priority, get your affairs in order, and make sure that you can join us because it's really going to be a happening.
It's going to be happening, my friend. Tickets will be available to RFR Patreon VIPs first. Then the rest of the Patreon community will get access. And then the entire Rebel Force Radio audience worldwide. But like I said, tickets will be limited. It's not like we can bring in 1,000 people to this thing. So it'll be limited. I'm not really sure exactly what the final number is that we're going to be settling on, but it's going to have to be a manageable size because, of course, we're going to be on the museum grounds, but also keep in mind, this is the home of Steve Sansweet.
And we may, who knows, we may decide to do different segments of the show in different parts, like Star Wars and pop culture in Steve's bathroom. We could do news headlines, in Steve's living. No. We can't be in Steve's living quarters. I'm sure he would love that. Can you imagine?
Oh my God. Yeah. Listener feedback in Steve's bedroom. Odd. But,
right.
But it's going to be the event of the year for Rebel Force Radio. And again, it's been something I've been wanting to do for years. So all the planets have aligned in the galaxy, and the timing is just right to make this happen.
Jim, I like to think that there are some folks out there that would have loved to have gone to Star Wars Celebration, but Japan just wasn't realistic for them. Right. But they're feeling that itch to get together with fellow fans, and this actually may be the thing that scratches that itch for a lot of Star Wars fans and Rebel Force Radio listeners. So,
Star Wars is always better as a community. And we're taking our community to the best place to gather for Star Wars fans in the world. And that's Steve Sansweet's Rancho Obi-Wan. So we'll keep you guys updated on when those tickets will actually go on sale. But as of right now, we're planning on late spring, late May, early June. And that's when it'll happen. I don't know, maybe it'll happen sooner, but we'll see. If you can't join us in September, though, I want you to take advantage of the Rancho Obi-Wan Summer Social Fundraiser, which will be celebrating Steve Sansweet's 80th birthday in June.
Wow, what a milestone.
And tickets are on...
Wow.
It's a milestone. Wow, Steve is 80. My goodness. And still just going as strong as ever. And I'm so excited that we'll be able to join him as he's in his 80th year of Star Wars. Actually, it'd be his 81st year, really, if you want to think about it. But who's got time for math? So the Rancho Obi-Wan Summer Social Fundraiser, those tickets are on sale now, and there's only a handful of tickets left for that. I anticipate those tickets will be gone sooner than later. So I'm just saying that's an option if you can't join us in September. But we want you guys to plan ahead and be prepared for those tickets to go on sale. There are plenty of hotel rooms available in Petaluma. Petaluma is an awesome little town just north of San Francisco. It's got a lot of quaint charm and kind of an old school appeal to it, if you ask me. It's just a great place, and you'll absolutely love it there. You'll love the grounds surrounding Rancho Obi-Wan, and I'm just really excited because I've been talking about Rancho Obi-Wan on this show for years and years, and I'm so happy to get this opportunity to be able to finally be there with our audience to share the experience with everyone. So if you're looking for the summer social fundraiser tickets, those are available now at ranchoobiwan.org, ranchoobiwan.org. But we also want you to be prepared for the RFR live event in September. Those tickets will be going on sale in May. And it's going to be just a great time. We'll be podcasting outside, too, which will be really nice.
That's great.
And, it's still real nice there in September at Rancho Obi-Wan in Petaluma. We're just going to have a wonderful time. So I think there are going to be different levels of tickets, different levels of experience in which you can buy a ticket for. I believe we'll have a VIP level that will maybe include earlier access, parking on the grounds. The parking on the grounds is very limited. So we're going to be recommending people, if they are driving to Petaluma, to park in the downtown parking garage and then just take a quick Uber. It'll be like a 5-minute ride to Rancho Obi-Wan, because there's not really street parking around it or anything like that. But we will make a limited amount of parking spaces available for one of the higher tier ticket experiences, just to make it a little more convenient. But I think everyone's just going to have an awesome time at this event. And again, it's something I've been wanting to do forever. So we're looking forward to seeing you guys all there. Join us in September 6th at Rancho Obi-Wan in Petaluma, California for RFR Live. Wow. I mean, the hairs on my arms just stood up when I said that.
It feels like it's been a while since we've been able to talk about a live event. But I mean, there's live events and then there's a live event at Rancho Obi-Wan. So that's a very different kind of thing. So I'm super excited about it. And Jim, you were talking about Petaluma. There might be some folks out there that say, well, I'm really into Star Wars, but my significant other, my spouse, not so much. It's such a historic city, town. There's so much to see. So if you like that, and also gorgeous, beautiful scenery. So it is something I think that you can plan on maybe making a little vacation out of it. If that's what you're looking to do, you can make a vacation spot out of it for sure.
Oh yeah, you're shooting distance to all of the great wineries in Sonoma, or even drive up a little north to Napa, and or drive down south to San Francisco. There's plenty to see there. Walk the Golden Gate Bridge. Go take your picture at the Yoda fountain at the Presidio, or
which we will be doing at about 3 a.m. We don't Can you imagine the
joking.
whole party?
You're joking. You're joking right now, but when we're crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, when we're at the wee hours of the morning, like, wait, I was just joking about this. But yeah, it's going to be one for the ages.
Yeah, it's going
to be one for the ages. We've done just about everything I could think of wanting to do with this podcast. But this is the one thing that's always kind of eluded us a little bit. And, we've come close before, but things would get in the way, like pandemics and things like that. So,
right.
Oh, and by the way, if you are already a member of Rancho Obi-Wan, the membership packets have been sent out, and they include a cool little patch here featuring an illustration of Stephen J. Sansweet on the actual patch. I think that's just great. It looks just like him.
It's fantastic.
So
I was really happy
check your
to see
mailbox for that.
Yeah.
But it's just going to be a great time. And we have so much love for those guys out there in Petaluma. And they tolerate us, too, which is really even
right.
great.
We love them. They tolerate us. It's a great relationship. Yeah. It's how it works.
Perfection. So we'll keep you guys up to speed for when those tickets go on sale, and you'll be ready to pounce on them. Like I said, our Patreon supporters will get first crack at it, and then it'll go out to the general public if there are tickets remaining after that. So, hey, get on board with RFR on Patreon. Why not? I'll tell you what's new on RFR on Patreon this week. We have a great Q&A with RFR VIP Scott St. Louis, who joins me to discuss the dark side of the Force. And it's a really fun conversation, man. We get deep. We use a few audio clips of George Lucas in the rare moments when he actually started to break down the Force and discuss it in detail. And we listen to what George has to say and compare it to what we've actually seen on screen in Star Wars films. We discuss our personal interpretations of the dark side of the Force, the balance of the Force.
Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some would consider to be unnatural.
So naturally, we talk about it on RFR Q&A. So that's available to all members, all supporters of Rebel Force Radio on Patreon. And Patreon is the place to be if you want bonus podcasts, ad-free podcasts, no advertising on the shows we release there, and full show video and cool perks like early access to RFR Live at Rancho Obi-Wan events. So get on board with us on Patreon, and you'll be in the driver's seat for when those tickets for RFR Live at Rancho Obi-Wan go on sale. You'll get first crack at it. So patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio is the place you want to be. And on September 6th, Rancho Obi-Wan with RFR is really the place you physically want to be, because it's going to be an epic adventure in California with Stephen J. Sansweet and the amazing world-class museum that is Rancho Obi-Wan. Yeah, man, it's going to be so much fun. I'm looking forward to just joining some of our listeners and going through the museum and pointing out my personal favorite items in there. I think I know the museum pretty well at this point.
I was going to say, you're practically a docent over there. I think you could probably do a tour yourself.
I think I could.
The Jimmy Mac tour.
You know what? I mean, you're not blowing smoke, pal. I really believe that's the truth. That's the truth. And if it were feasible for me, I would be a volunteer there. But obviously, Chicago and Petaluma, that's one hell of a commute.
It sure is. Yeah.
I can only take advantage of the museum from time to time. And the next time I'm going to be taking advantage of that museum is September 6th with my good friend Jason Swank. Try to maybe convince Billy Mack to join us. Or Tyler Page. I'd love to get Kyle and FJ out to it. Not to apply too much pressure, guys. But,
we never have done a live event together, all four of us. You throw in
that's right.
You, me, believe it or not, you, me, FJ, and Kyle have never done a live event at the same time. We've had FJ we've hung out with FJ and Kyle, but never on air, never as
That's
part
true.
of a show.
That's true. You know, FJ is always he's the rare factor in all of this.
Right,
And,
right.
Yeah. So if we could get FJ DeSanto to make one of his rare appearances, but of course he's a big time entertainment executive, producer who is always he's always in Japan for some reason, you know. And,
I mean, he's visiting those animation studios and things like that.
Yeah. So it's going to be a great time, and it's absolutely official. It's happening. So we were shooting for a May the 4th thing, but it just the stars wouldn't align for that one. But they're definitely on our side. September 6th for RFR Live at Rancho Obi-Wan. Oh, I can't wait.
You must contact me.
Play back the entire message.
What message?
Message after the message.
The Emperor commands you to make contact with him. It's a trick. Send no reply.
Hey Jason, hey Jimmy, it's Nathan from Atlanta, and I was just listening to one of your guys' episodes, and we were talking about, I think an older episode, but you guys were talking about Star Wars animation and just kind of like, what's the next step, and what are they working on, and we don't really know what they're working on, but we know they're working on something. And I also know that there have been rumors about a KOTOR remake and things like that, and I was wondering what your thoughts on maybe instead of doing like a movie or a remake of Knights of the Old Republic, but making it as an animated series and like getting to see, you know, Darth Revan and Darth Malak as, you know, the Star Wars animation characters instead of just like in a regular movie. And personally, I think that it'd be really cool. I think there are a lot of capabilities, and I think animation provides some more opportunities that maybe live action doesn't. And if it's really successful, then make a KOTOR movie. But that's just my thoughts. Wanted to hear your thoughts, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'm thankful for everything you guys do. I love Rebel Force Radio, and may the Force be with you.
All right, Nathan from Atlanta, thank you very much for the question. Jim, Star Wars animation, what does the future hold? We've talked a lot about this recently, and we are expecting an announcement coming up at Celebration Japan as far as what the next project is going to be from Lucasfilm Animation. But in terms of what you would like to see and whether or not something like a Knights of the Old Republic, if animation would be the right venue, would be the right medium for something like a KOTOR adaptation, I've thought that for the longest time. I've thought that you could do, and this goes back to when George was still running the show, the idea of being able to do a Legends series. I mean, other look at what Marvel has done with What If. I mean, even Lego, Star Wars Lego did a What If. I think the days of worrying about whether or not people can decipher the continuity and the canon and all that, I think the ship has sailed on that. I think even if you're really, really concentrating and trying to follow the lore to the extent that they're really trying to preserve its integrity at Lucasfilm, if you're really trying to pay attention, I think it's challenging. So why not just tell some really great stories and not necessarily worry if it's canon? You could call them Star Wars Legends, as they've done with the publishing side of things. So I think that it would make a great way to pull in and celebrate and honor some of those stories. And there are tons of fans of those stories. One last thing I just want to mention for me personally, there were rumors, and I believe this was a pitch, of a series for animation that involved a Luke Skywalker very, very early post Return of the Jedi, where he was going to be almost like a Batman type character or a Zorro or, you know, any of these kind of masked vigilantes, where he was going to show up, kick some ass, Jedi style, save some people, and then split. Almost as if this was him refining his training and really gearing himself up to what would later, I think, occupy him, which is building the Jedi Order, the new Jedi Order. And I just thought, what a cool concept to have this kind of ghost-like Jedi figure that would just be going out there and rooting out the corruption, helping the New Republic by rooting out some of these corrupt elements. I thought it was a great idea, and that's something I'd love to see them maybe resuscitate.
Man, I haven't thought about that rumored pitch in a long time, pal. But yeah, I think it was supposed to take place 15 years after Return of the Jedi. And yeah, Luke would be just someone who would appear out of the shadows and bring down the hand of justice onto the ne'er-do-wells of the galaxy. And then, yeah, very much kind of like a Batman sort of vigilante kind of character. But obviously that never saw the light of day, and the character of Luke Skywalker has taken many different left turns and everything since then. But the things that we've been hearing about the future of Star Wars animation is there's going to be 2 animated series coming. One being produced by the same crew that produced Star Wars Rebels. And we don't know what that would be about. But we would assume it would have a similar vibe, or maybe a Clone Wars type vibe to it. And then the other one was a purely anime series, a purely anime Star Wars series. But I think something's getting screwed up in the interpretation of that information as it's being presented to us. I think the person who told us that actually was being exposed to material for Star Wars Visions Season 3. As a matter of fact, I'm really getting more and more confident that is the case.
So they're talking about it's one project, really, not 2.
Well, I think so, but you never know. I mean, it could be determined that the Star Wars Visions template was a success. Yeah. And there might be an attempt to try to make a full-on, ongoing Star Wars anime show. I wouldn't put that past anyone, but I still am suspicious about the information about it being a series to be announced like relatively soon. I don't know. I think if we heard anything about it, would be
we're ways away from an official announcement. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's just going to be yet another season of Star Wars Visions. I don't know. But I do like the idea of the Lucasfilm team that worked on Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars conjuring up a new series, the same guys who worked on Bad Batch, etc. They have all the models and assets and that can be tweaked and updated and present an all new story. We don't know exactly what that is, or it'll surprise us, I'm sure. Now, as far as KOTOR, we know that for maybe the last 10 years, something has been in development as far as KOTOR. Maybe a lot of false starts and stops and things like that. But I believe that's all in the live action realm. And I think it's really uncommon to say, well, we can't make this happen in live action. Let's shift it to animation. I mean, sure, it sounds simple, but that never happens. I think once something is being developed for live action, it'll continue to be developed for live action. And if they can't make it happen, it'll just sit on the shelf. So if a KOTOR thing was going to happen, I think it would be in live action, not as an animated show. But I do think it's a strong candidate to be a potentially great animated series. But the development has all been within the realm of live action, from what I understand. So could be right, could be wrong. There are just so many different Star Wars storylines that can be adapted to animation. KOTOR is a good one, but there are so many others. The Luke Skywalker vigilante one sounds good to me.
Yeah.
But there's so many moving parts going on here with all of the other series and stuff and potential films to be made.
Yeah.
And with Kathy Kennedy starting to ramp down her career as Star Wars, as the president of Lucasfilm and the head honcho of all things Star Wars, I don't know if any new projects can get worked up like right now, other than the things we already know.
Yeah, they might not want to take it down too far the road. Now, maybe they would just make things easier if they decided to turn this Rey story into an animated series. Then you don't have to worry about Daisy Ridley getting older. You don't have to worry about any of that. She can always do the voice, and they can have a rotating door of directors and writers all they want. That's pretty commonplace on an animated series. Might solve all their problems.
But again, like I said, it doesn't seem like they would take something being developed for live action, a feature film, and say, well, we can't make this film. Let's turn it into a cartoon show. It just doesn't work that way. So, I think Star Wars Celebration Japan might provide some information, but I'm not putting all of my, my money in that bank account. I don't know.
I would say too, even though, as you mentioned, they have all of the assets from Clone Wars and Bad Batch in that style. I'm not dying to see more clones, more Clone Wars era stuff outside of live action. Now, live action with Hayden, yes, Hayden and Ewan, and yes, absolutely, I'm there for it. But I just think that as far as animation, that's kind of run its course. I would still love to see that style. I really like that style. I think it's very much, to me, that's Star Wars animation. So I would love to see that style brought to another era of the saga. I really would.
Oh yeah, me too. I really would. I think a good thing, if you did want to continue the storyline beyond Clone Wars and Bad Batch, a Captain Rex animated series featuring him and a bunch of clone troopers rebelling against the Empire and their stormtroopers, the TKs versus the clone troopers in what I would call, Clone Wars 2. That would be very interesting.
We speculated that we were going to get something like that, and it never really happened.
No, not with Bad Batch. Bad Batch appeared to be telling a big, broad story that we saw just like really shrink down into a very confined, smaller story as it went on, in a very specific story. No large galactic conflict. It was more about these particular characters and specifically Omega.
Yeah.
So it never really tackled.
It started small,
grand,
got bigger, and then ended small
and
again.
Shrunk back down.
Yeah.
I've had hemorrhoids do that.
Thank goodness. You need those things to be tapered, Jimmy Mac. You can't.
Oh, no kidding. I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but I think news on an animated series is imminent, and Star Wars Celebration Japan would be the ideal place. But we know how those announcements go at those shows. And, sometimes announcing something at Star Wars Celebration is the kiss of death for a Star Wars project. So we'll just have to wait and see.
All the panels that have thus far been announced for Star Wars Celebration Japan are all what you would expect. There is an Andor Season 2. There is an Ahsoka panel. There is a Mandalorian and Grogu panel. So there's nothing like the future of Star Wars animation or anything like that to leave it open for an announcement. And I also don't think when you look at the singularity of these panels, Mandalorian and Grogu, Ahsoka Season 2, and Andor Season 2, that they're going to want to steal the thunder of those projects by saying, and we have this other thing that we're ready to announce. I don't see that happening. So I would be surprised if there are any big surprises, at least as far as new things announced.
Yeah. It's really interesting to be having this convention in Japan. And I was talking to some insiders this week. I said, what do you think the possibility is for a Star Wars celebration in the States next year? And they're like, oh, no, not next year. It'll probably be for the 50th anniversary. And I said, I don't know. You got the franchise returning to the silver screen next year with the Mandalorian and Grogu film. And if you ask yourself, what are fans more excited for right now? The next Star Wars film to hit the theaters or the 50th anniversary of the franchise? I think hands down, it's the next film to go into theaters. Nobody cares about anniversaries. No. They just make nice marketing opportunities.
That's
for
all
the corporations.
Yes.
Come celebrate with us. Well, how are we going to celebrate? What are you going to do? Trot out? Are we going to like be surrounded with the cast and crew of
well, do you remember the cake,
all
Jim?
the Star Wars projects over the years? Or
remember the 30th anniversary cake?
Yeah, the cake.
When they wheeled that cake out
It's
for
all
those
just a
opening
bunch of
ceremonies. And it was like, oh, great, 30 years, celebrating 30 years with stale cake. Yeah, it was kind of a letdown because when you think about these big anniversaries, your mind goes crazy. Like you said, you think you're going to be surrounded by all the surviving members of the original cast and all of that. And those are very difficult things to pull off. And so they don't tend to happen. Oh, I do want to mention, I just want to correct myself. There is a fourth of these panels. And Jim, Star Wars Visions is getting its own panel, Star Wars Visions Season 3. So maybe there's something there.
I just think it's extremely astute of you to say that any sort of announcements they make at this could steal the thunder from the things they're really there to promote. And they're there to promote Andor, Ahsoka coming next year, Mando and Grogu coming next year, Star Wars Visions coming later this year. Those are the 4 things that are in the hopper right now. Everything else is sort of in this pre-production developmental stage, which we know is thin ice. And we'll have examples of how thin that ice actually can be coming up in news headlines shortly as we talk about Star Wars Underworld, Star Wars Detours, the Rey film, all of these things that the Rey film, who knows what's going on with that. I do find it interesting, though, there were rumors about Daisy Ridley potentially being offered a role in the Spider-Man 4 film with Tom Holland. But they did announce a female co-star for that film this week. I can't remember who her name is, but I assumed that would have been the role that would have been offered to Daisy Ridley. So maybe there is a heartbeat here for the Rey film, potentially getting in front of cameras maybe next year. But I don't know. We'll talk about that more later as we have audio highlights from the former writer of that project, Stephen Knight, and Daisy Ridley herself spoke about returning to the role of Rey. So we'll talk about that in news headlines.
All right, before we do that, we do want to tell you a little bit about our good friends over at Factor. I just had a Factor lunch today, as a matter of fact. But if you're ready to optimize your nutrition this year, Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes. That's no exaggeration. 2 minutes and it's ready to go. So you can feel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active, busy lifestyle. And you all know out there, between kids and work and school and all the things that we're doing, we're living busy lifestyles. And here's the best part. You can lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks with the Factor Keto Meals. Based on a randomized control clinical trial with Factor Keto, of course, results will vary depending on diet and exercise. But with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. Choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. And Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies and breakfasts, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. So reach your goals this year with ingredients that you can trust and convenience that can't be beat.
We've been talking about Factor for a while on this show, and every time I get a shipment from Factor, I'm so excited because I know I'm going to be eating fresh, not frozen food. These aren't TV dinners. These are actually chef-prepared meals that you can heat and eat in just a matter of minutes. Just pop them in the microwave. It's great if you are always on the go, or maybe you're a single guy living on your own who can't tell the difference between a spoon and a spatula in the kitchen, and you just want to eat well. You're tired of those greasy fast food burgers. You're sick of those fattening sub sandwiches. Sure, they're fine every once in a while, but when you want to have a quality meal, you want to eat Factor. And my favorite from this latest shipment was the loaded bacon shredded chicken with sautéed spinach, green beans, and ranch sour cream. Ooh. Oh my God, I couldn't get enough of it. I would have accepted an entire box of nothing but that meal. It was so So good. And now when I'm in my day job and I'm pulling the Factor out of the microwave, like a crowd starts to gather around because it smells so good. And I get jealous looks from my coworker as they're walking into their offices with their bags of greasy cheeseburgers. Oh, man, I'm living right. I'm eating fresh, good food, chef prepared, and just wonderful. Factor can't be beat. And we want you guys in the RFR audience to eat smart with Factor. So get started right now, factormeals.com/factorpodcast. And use the code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/FACTORPODCAST to get that 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. We love Factor. We want you to love Factor. You know, this isn't a secret we want to keep to ourselves. We want RFR listeners to get on board with Factor, eat smart, eat well, and enjoy every meal with Factor.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
All right out of the gate here with headlines. Rick McCallum, Star Wars Underworld, details revealed what could have been, what might have been, and what some say should have been the future of Star Wars. And Jim, you know, this goes back to those days following the release of Revenge of the Sith. You remember what that was like. What's next? What's going to happen? Because George was telling us that he'd wrapped up his saga. It was the end. That he had told his story, that little did we know back in the late 70s that this was not the story of Luke Skywalker and his rebel band. This was really the story of Anakin Skywalker, who turned into Darth Vader and was redeemed at the end. So all along, it was always about Vader. So what was next? Well, apparently what was next, and George did tell us a little bit along the way, and you might hear from this guy, Rick McCallum, through things like Star Wars Insider updates about the show that was going to really just be about background characters. We knew that they were going to focus on the seedy underworld, and it just was one of those projects that, I know like a lot of people, you'd get the Star Wars Insider each month and you'd look for the McCallum interview, and there might be a little bit of detail in there, not much. And it just kind of dragged and dragged and dragged and dragged. And there wasn't really a whole lot of momentum. And of course, all the scripts ended up on the shelf. But that's not to say that there weren't some heavy hitters involved in this. This isn't a project that they just talked about, that they did, a little bit of R&D on. I mean, they got really far into it before the plug was pulled.
Yeah. They sure did. I mean, way deep into it. We thought things were quiet over at Skywalker Ranch during this time, but George was working on not only Star Wars Underworld, but Clone Wars was still in production. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Star Wars Detours was also being produced. And Rick McCallum has... I don't know how they tracked him down, but they did. The guys from the Young Indie Chroniclers, great guys who are friends of RFR. They support Rebel Force Radio. Daniel Noah and Peter Holmstrom. They're Patreon supporters, and they got this great podcast going, the Young Indie Chroniclers, where they talk about the Young Indiana Jones series, which was called the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And they're talking to everyone from Rick McCallum to Ben Burt and beyond, and they're real excited about this podcast. They reached out to us and they said, "Hey, you got to check this out." And they released it, and the thing just blew up. I even saw Variety reporting on it this week. So good on you guys.
Yeah,
for a new podcast to be getting this kind of traction, media attention. That's great. That's great. So the Rick McCallum, it's a 3-part interview. And the third part just was released, and that's where they get into some nitty-gritty about Rick's time with George Lucas as Lucasfilm was winding down, and his work on Star Wars Underworld. So let's just get right into it. Here's Rick talking about just kind of giving the basics of Star Wars Underworld and the sky-high cost per episode of the series as was determined by Rick as he was crunching the numbers.
You know, there was a period where people thought we weren't doing anything, and we spent 5 years doing, I think we had, God, I'm just trying to think, I'm probably wrong about this, but I think we had over 60 scripts, third draft scripts. Again, the most wonderful writers in the world on it. Just, and again, we created exactly the same experience for everybody at the ranch. And again, just phenomenal group of talent. And these were dark. These were not, they were sexy, they were violent, they were just absolutely wonderful, complicated, challenging. I mean, it would have blown up the whole Star Wars universe. And Disney definitely would have never offered George to buy that. But no, they were, it's one of the great disappointments of our life. The problem was each episode was bigger than the films. The lowest I could get it down to, with the technology that existed then, was about $40 million an episode.
Wow.
$40 million. I mean, that's way more expensive than the most expensive shows being produced today, I believe. Things like the Ring of Power, Lord of the Rings series on Amazon. I know that's a real pricey one, but I don't think it hits 40 million an episode. And also we're talking about numbers that they were estimating back in, 2008. So 15 years ago. So really expensive stuff. $40 million an episode. And if they had 60 episodes, he talked about 60 third draft scripts. And one of our comments about some Disney Plus series is it seems like they never even got into a second draft script before they shot these things. So when Rick says third, he doesn't say that lightly. Third draft scripts, which means these were very, very likely ready to be shot. These were shooting scripts that they had. And with 60 of those and $40 million per episode, Jim, this would have cost the full budget for this series would have been $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion. To put it into perspective, because I wanted to grab some of these budgets and adjusting for inflation. The original benchmark, the first film, Star Wars: A New Hope, was an $11 million budget, 1977 or 1976 dollars. That's the equivalent of $52 million today. $52 million today, and we're talking about $40 million for an hour episode. And then you get into things like Andor, which is the full tag on that, 24 episodes, 2 seasons, $645 million. So even if you adjust for inflation, it's a lot worse. However, the technology is key here. The technology that they didn't have, that they now have with things like the volume, that's a big deal. And also just the general cost of computer processing, all the things that goes into special effects making has, in some cases, become almost something you get when you buy a new MacBook Pro, at the store. A lot of this capability. So that's also a huge factor in this. And also, I brought up 2008 just kind of as a random date because I know that's when they were working on this stuff at Skywalker Ranch. And if you research what the most expensive television show on the air in 2008 was, it was HBO's True Blood, which cost around $5 million an episode. So they're talking about making a TV series that is $35 million more per episode than the most expensive show in production at that time. Yeah. So very unfeasible as far as traditional production budgets go. Nowadays with Amazon and Netflix, they throw in Disney Plus, they throw it seems like unlimited budgets at these shows.
Well, you mentioned
But
Ring
back
of
then-
Power. Season 1 of Ring of Power was 400 and is purported to be $465 million. That doesn't even include the $250 million they paid for the rights to the Tolkien estate. So that total price tag is over $700 million. But there's something else here that he mentions that I thought was because you brought up True Blood, and I started thinking about that era of television that we know George was really into. He loved Westworld. He loved Rome. He loved The Sopranos. He loved these shows that were out at that. Deadwood, yeah.
The Wire.
The Wire, right, was another one. And as Rick says, these shows were dark. They were sexy. They were violent. And that does seem to be the direction, surprisingly so, that George was going. I say surprisingly so because to this day, and we were talking at our own Jedi Council over the weekend about this, a clip popped up about George talking about who shot first, Han and Greedo, and George started to talk about, there's fans out there that want Han Solo to be a cold-blooded killer, and that's not what Star Wars is about, and blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah? What about this dark, sexy, violent TV show you were making in the spirit of a Deadwood, of a Rome? So, George is very selective in his in the way he says certain things and portrays certain things. But how sexy, dark, and violent can George get? Does he even have the capacity?
Well, I think he was looking to maybe break free of his self-imposed boundaries when it came to creating a modern Star Wars story. Now, the Skywalker saga, which they call it now, but back then we just called it the sequels or the prequels and the OT. Those had very specific rules as far as George Lucas was concerned. But I think he was looking to break beyond that, to go outside the ordinary with Star Wars, to the point where Rick McCallum said Disney would have never bought it.
Yes.
Because it didn't fit the Disney mold, with it being so mature and so raw and violent and sexy and all of that stuff. So that might explain why Star Wars Underworld never continued production once those scripts were developed.
Good
because
point.
George then knew that he was working on a deal with Disney and he didn't want to scare them off by showing them these Underworld scripts. Yeah, this is where it's going. We got this sucker in the pipeline, and Disney's just like having a heart attack, Bob Iger grabbing his chest.
We did. The show focuses on a young prostitute that gets murdered by some bounty hunters in cold blood. Yeah, it's great. Good Star Wars stuff.
Oh wow! So I did mention HBO at that time had the most expensive show in production with True Blood, at $5 million, and so McCallum and Lucas they attempted to work a deal with HBO because they couldn't afford the budget for Star Wars Underworld. And then the only way they knew how to make it happen was to work on a deal with a company like HBO. And it seems like that they were really getting close to working on a deal with HBO, but some unfortunate things happened. And Rick explains in this next clip.
So we went to, he's a wonderful guy who ran HBO. He was kind of let go because there was a kind of scandal in Las Vegas. Jesus, such a brilliant guy. Chris Albrecht, he bought into it. He thought, if we can get a European partner, let's do this. He had a conference or something in Vegas, and he was coming to see us on Monday at the ranch to discuss it because we thought, okay, well, there's an Indiana Jones, another Indiana Jones film we might be able to give him. We might be able to, there was little carrots and sticks that were involved in this that we thought, okay, he might just go for $40 million in an episode, or if he doesn't, and we can't find a partner, could he? If we gave him something else, could we? We didn't know what it was, but maybe another Star Wars film or something, anything. At least we'd tell him that. Anyway, he was all scheduled to come in, I think, at 10 or 11 o'clock on fly from Vegas straight to the ranch. And he got caught up in some bizarre scandal where he was filmed with his girlfriend and everything else. And it turned into a kind of major scandal, and HBO let him go. The night before he was coming to see us. And then, of course, we waited for the fallout to happen and went straight to the new people that Warner Brothers had put in at HBO. And they had they weren't going to do anything expensive anymore. They were going to do small films. They would just, no desire to even meet with us. Ugh. And there was no other place you could go to. Apple didn't thing, Amazon, even Netflix wasn't around.
Yeah, the executive he's talking about is Chris Albrecht, who allegedly assaulted, I'm going to say allegedly because I don't know if it went to trial or what, but allegedly assaulted his girlfriend outside of the MGM Grand Casino in Vegas. Also, Jim, you were absolutely right when you were sort of setting the time period of 2008. That's when True Blood premiered. There were shows like the John Adams miniseries, The Wire, Entourage, Big Love. These were shows that were on HBO at that time, ongoing series or new series. And so if you're going to sit there and you're going to talk to a guy like Chris Albrecht and pitch him a Star Wars show, it's got to fit in with what they're putting out there. So I can now I'm not suggesting that it was going to be as intense and hardcore as The Wire or True Blood, but I mean it has to fit. Even though it is Star Wars, it's not about Darth Vader. It's not about the characters that we all grew up with. So it's still a risk for a company like HBO. So it had to make sense, and it sounds like they were really close.
Oh, real close. The guy was in Vegas, going directly from Vegas to San Francisco to Skywalker Ranch. But in Vegas, somebody caught him on video beating up his girlfriend, allegedly, and that queered the whole deal.
Yeah.
And so that was 2007 when that happened. So yeah, we can pinpoint the date exactly. I was saying 2008, and True Blood being $500 million. Well, the most expensive TV show in 2007 was HBO's Rome at $9 million an episode. So we're inching closer to the Star Wars Underworld budget.
Yeah.
But as Rick said in that clip, HBO restructured itself and stopped investing so much money in their own productions. They pared it down and streamlined their spending a little bit in the wake of Albrecht having to resign.
Yeah. I don't think Curb Your Enthusiasm was costing $10 million an episode or anything like that. I think Curb brought the average cost down.
Boy, imagine a relationship with HBO could have potentially led to a situation where Larry David appeared in Star Wars Underworld.
Wow. Wow. Can you imagine?
One can only dream. But so the guys from the Young Indie Chroniclers asked Rick, where are those Star Wars Underworld scripts now?
Disney owns those scripts, so they'll never be made.
But will they ever be published? Like, at this point, I'll settle for a book.
No, we can't even publish them. Yeah, no. I mean, seriously, they're so well done, and they're so dark and complicated, and just would have turned the whole saga on its head. And it would have allowed Disney to go off and make... instead of these kind of cookie cutter Star Wars films, they could have gone off in any direction and made, the equivalent of what, Nolan did with Batman.
I don't suppose you have a copy of those scripts sitting at home. Yeah.
I do, but here's the problem. We're not allowed,
of course,
to have them.
You're not allowed to have them.
You know what I mean? We're not allowed to have them, show them, do anything.
I like that they know they think they know where Rick's going, like where he's going to say, well, I have them, but I can't share them with you. And Rick is like, no, it's not even, I'm not even allowed to have them. Right. No one's allowed to have them. Dang.
Yeah, sure. I got them at home, but I'm not allowed to have them. Comprende?
And Rick's the kind of guy that would probably say, yeah, if Disney execs got fresh with him, yeah, come and get them from me. Just come to the house and grab them out of my hand. Rick's a tough SOB. I love it. I love the grit in his voice and everything. He was a character, man. He was a character.
He's something of a spirit animal to a guy like me. I just love his no nonsense, shoot from the hip style, and the way he's just such a bulldog and he gets things done. That's Rick McCallum. So Rick talked a little bit more about working with well-known screenwriter and television writer Ronald D. Moore. You know, Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek, Roswell, Carnival. Ronald D. Moore has done a lot in the business, and Outlander, which ran for like forever, Outlander. Yeah. And so Ronald D. Moore was brought on board to the project, and Rick talks a little bit about working with him.
You know, I was desperate to try and make him the showrunner of the thing because George, we had so much other stuff to do. But, you know, George wanted to hold on. But he was definitely one of the lead. He was the lead writer of the Underworld.
Ooh, okay. What do we take from this? George wanted to hold on. Rick wanted Ronald D. Moore to be the showrunner, but George wanted to hold on. Was George Lucas going to be the showrunner of Star Wars Underworld?
Sure sounds like it.
Sure does. Yeah. It sure does. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a revelation.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, what could have been? What could have been?
Dang.
But I don't know. You know, not really understanding Star Wars Underworld because it's been shrouded in so much mystery. We can say, boy, what could have been? Or we could say, we dodged a bullet with that one. But I don't know. Judging by the talent that was brought in to work on this thing, you had, in addition to Ronald D. Moore, you also had writers from HBO shows like The Wire and Deadwood, etc. So it would have been very interesting, a very interesting take.
It sure would have been. And so, who knows? Never say never. If Disney gets desperate enough to cash in, maybe those scripts will get published. Who knows? I doubt it, but
publish nothing. I want to see them get produced.
Well,
it
yeah,
sounds like it might be a little too hardcore for the Disney company. So
the Disney company that owns the whole Fox catalog, that has Predator on its streaming service. I mean,
yeah, but that's Fox still. I mean, that's not under that doesn't have the Disney label on it necessarily. You know.
Yeah.
So I think they're very precious about what Disney produces. They're very precious about that. So Ronald D. Moore would have been the head writer of, he was the head writer of Star Wars Underworld. And as coincidence would have it, Katie Sackhoff interviewed Ronald D. Moore and released a podcast featuring the interview with Ron on the Sackhoff Show this week. So you have these revelations from, I mean, it's crazy timing. You have these revelations from Rick McCallum via our friends at the Young Indie Chroniclers. And then you have Ron Moore talking Star Wars Underworld with our friend Katie Sackhoff on the Sackhoff Show. So it's crazy how the timing worked out. And I've seen fans, jumping to conclusions saying, oh, this means something. This means... Trust me, guys, this is all very random. This is not some sort of coordinated effort by Disney and Lucasfilm to promote a project that never happened. They can barely promote the projects that are happening. What makes you think that they're going to be promoting Star Wars Underworld? Because they're going to resurrect it? That ain't happening. You just heard Rick McCallum say that's not happening. So, and he's the source as far as this stuff goes. But let's hear what Ron Moore had to say to Katie about joining the Star Wars Underworld writers' room.
Galactica was winding down. Caprica was starting. Right around that period, I got a call that George Lucas wants to meet with you about a possible series. What? Huh? Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Again,
just for the meeting.
Just for the meeting. I'm there. So meet with George. He was very nice, and his producer Rick McCallum. And turned out at that point George was wanted to do a live action Star Wars TV series. And this is after, he had done the prequels, but clearly before any of the other movies and stuff. And it was like, wow. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to gather a group of writers together, kind of an international group of writers. So I was one of the Americans, and there were some from the UK and from Australia and New Zealand, and and he would bring us together up at Skywalker Ranch for like a long weekend.
Oh, just a long weekend with George. Weekend at George's. Sure. But he's very specific, Jim, to talk about he wanted an international group of writers. So he clearly, and as Rick McCallum was talking about, they not only needed to have something stateside, but they needed to be able to offer this worldwide.
True, yeah. Obviously, they're shooting for a worldwide audience with something like this, especially at its cost. They want to get it in front of as many people as possible to regain those funds. It's kind of crazy, though, the experience that Ron Moore shares about working on Star Wars Underworld. He talks a little bit about, working with a guy like George Lucas in that writer's room and gives us a taste of how all that went down.
So, yeah, we would go for these long weekends or a week or something at a time, sit with George in a conference room at the Skywalker Ranch and break these stories. And then we would go off for like another 6 weeks up by ourselves, write the scripts, then regather, talk about notes, do another group of scripts. And this went on for like a year or two or something. Yeah. We would just gather, break up, gather, break. And the writers would kind of change. Not everybody could go to every session. New people came out. I didn't go to all the sessions. And we wrote something like, I think 48 or 50 episodes. Oh, yeah, there's like 48 or at least it's definitely in the 40s. I think 48 or 50 scripts for this series. And when we got to that point, George said, okay, that's enough. And then he wanted to just take those scripts and he was just going to go shoot them on his dime, which is kind of what he had done with Clone Wars, the TV show.
Right.
Like he was just going to produce this series. And in George's mind, it was, once I've produced it, I'm just going to then take it to a network and go, take it or leave it. This is what it is. I don't care what your notes are. I don't care what your thoughts are. It is done. Do you want it? And they would have no choice but just to say, yes, Mr. Lucas, here's your check. That's where we left it with him. And he went off, and I think he did they shot some test footage because he was, George loves technology and he was exploring different things of CGI and what became the volume and all that stuff was percolating at ILM. Shot some test stuff for some scenes, but not too long after that, like another year maybe goes by, and he sold the whole thing kit and caboodle to Disney, all Lucasfilm. And so the project never happened. And that's what happened. I wrote, I think, 2 of those scripts.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So there you go. We're talking years. This isn't something that happened for a few months. This is years of these writers' sessions with guys like Ronald Moore. They were serious as a heart attack about this thing actually happening. And I do remember George saying that he wanted to produce the whole thing and then go out and sell it. $2.4 billion worth. Now, that's one of the reasons why it's claimed that it didn't happen, because it was going to be way too expensive. But I can't imagine. I don't think that that's ever been done. Even with the Clone Wars, he found distribution through Cartoon Network while it was being produced. It wasn't like he produced 5 seasons of the Clone Wars and then went to Cartoon Network. So this is a crazy model. And maybe it was because they knew that they were pushing the envelope a little bit when it came to Star Wars. And as Ron points out, George doesn't want to hear anyone's notes. He didn't want to hear any of the networks tell him what it should be or might be. He wanted to say, this is the show. Do you want it? That's very Lucas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's always wanting to avoid studio interference with his stories. And this goes all the way back to THX 1138. When the studio heads got their hands on that movie and they chopped it up, and it drove George crazy for years until he was able to devise a director's cut and release it to video decades later and tell the story that he wanted to tell. But he felt really burned by the THX 1138 experiment and experience and vowed to never let that happen again. And he did, he did. His success opened the door to total independence as a filmmaker, but his ideas outpaced his success as a filmmaker. And it was just impossible for him to afford the funding of a show this ambitious. And the thing that would have really pushed it over the top is if they could have developed the technology back in 2008 to make the show happen. Very similar with the original Star Wars, where a lot of the technology had to be developed before they could make the film. By the time they finally did develop that technology at ILM, the clock was ticking on Star Wars A New Hope. They had to get that thing happening, and that was a big source of stress for George Lucas, which also might come into play as to why he eventually abandoned Star Wars Underworld. Now, Ron tells a fun story here, though, about actually getting into debates with George Lucas about elements of Star Wars in the writer's room. And it seems like an absurd position to take, but that's the reality of the writer's room. And Ron explains how that went down.
It was amazing. It was an amazing sitting in a room with George Lucas and arguing about Star Wars.
Arguing about Star Wars?
Oh, yeah, because as a writer, at a certain point, you get over your awe, and now you're just in a writer's room, and he's telling you something about Darth Vader that doesn't make sense. You're like, I don't think that's really who Darth Vader is. Let me tell you about Darth Vader. He's actually, and George, I don't think that's, Darth Vader. And you're like, yeah, but George, he wouldn't do this. You're just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Where am I?
But that's amazing.
Yeah, you just kind of forget, and now you're just in a story conference having an argument,
Well, and we've heard stories back in the day of guys that were working for the games division having debates with George, and knowing that despite the fact that he's the maker, he's the guy, he's the creator, he wasn't always right. His instincts weren't always necessarily what was right for this story that they were telling, and there were some very, very interesting and odd choices that he would make along the way. So no one's perfect, no one's infallible, but what a surreal experience to even have the opportunity to be in a room and tell George Lucas what you think Darth Vader's real motivations would be. And I don't think that Ron just picked a character out of the air. I think he said Darth Vader for a specific reason, and that's because Darth Vader was going to be in this series.
Oh, sure he was. Sure he was. We heard George talk about it from time to time, saying, these characters are so well known in Star Wars, like the Emperor and Darth Vader. They're lurking in the background. They're not really in the spotlight of the show, but the characters certainly do talk about them. Mm-hmm. But you can only have a conversation about Darth Vader for so long before Darth Vader shows up. What? Yeah. So I'm sure we would have seen Vader at some point. We've also heard rumors about this show. It would have been based on Coruscant. It probably would have featured Boba Fett. I believe Daniel Logan was training for the role just to, make himself ready in case he got the call.
Yeah.
And the Emperor, there would have been an exploration into him and into what made him so evil to begin with in the first place. And it comes down to being spurned by a woman. Those are the rumors we heard in the past.
Indeed.
The information about Star Wars Underworld has been, it's all been very shrouded in mystery, and it's kind of fun to hear these guys talking about it now so far after the fact. But it's just one of those things that could have happened and never did, and I'm not holding my breath expecting it to happen. Like I said, there's been a lot of people reacting online, thinking that this is some sort of feeler going on here with these tightly coordinated interviews. The thing with Katie Sackhoff, it was clear that Katie was just asking Ron if he would be interested in working on Star Wars, and Ron started opening up about the Underworld experience.
Right.
I don't know how much Katie was on board with that whole concept going into the interview. And the Rick McCallum thing, Rick was conducting an interview about the Young Indiana Jones series. And the hosts of the Young Indie Chroniclers, they just happen to naturally be big Star Wars fans too. And they had Rick McCallum on the line and took advantage of the opportunity. God bless them. But yeah, they weren't working in coordination with Disney or anything like that. It was all just very natural. And
sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
That's
and
right.
nothing more.
That's right. So that's Ron Moore. He's a writer who almost had his Star Wars stories told in live action, which leads us to another writer who almost had his story told in live action and still might have elements of that story appearing in the new Jedi Order Rey film to be directed by Shamin Obaid-Chinoy that has gone through a series of writers at this point. And now George Nolfi is working on it. But Stephen Knight spent a considerable amount of time working on that script, and he appeared on Playlist's Binge-Worthy podcast and talked about his time working on the new Jedi Order script with Lucasfilm.
It was such a great experience, and I'm not just saying this, they were great people. Kathleen Kennedy is a pleasure to work with. Smart people who know their craft. And for me, it's like a particular discipline in the world of writing and film. It's this world, and you enter the world and you do your bit and you do your take. And then I always knew the process then moves on. So I don't know what of the stuff that I've submitted is going to end up in whatever the next incarnation of the thing is. It's just great to be there and to be part of that and to feel it's like stepping into like a really like stepping into a hurricane in a way because of the fans, because of what they want and what they feel. So you're in this world and you're doing your bit in this world. I love it. You either get blown away or you use it. And I really wanted to use that energy to do what I do, to contribute what I want to contribute. And, there's all these people have contributed over the years, and it is absolutely a cultural tradition now. And, you enter it with reverence and do what you can, and then hope that you've done stuff that's going to, end up on that huge screen.
Yes. So, well, he says all the right things. Everybody was great to work with. Kathleen Kennedy was a pleasure to work with. They all know their craft, and it was an honor to be able to make contributions, and it's a cultural phenomenon. All the things that you would expect. Very little on any kind of detail as to the story. Obviously, he can't speak to that. But the one thing that I would take away from that is he did make it sound as though this is somewhat commonplace, that this does happen, that he knew that there's a process and knew going in that this is the way that it might go. And I would just go back, Jim, to what we talked about when we were last week, when we were reviewing Kathleen Kennedy's interview in Deadline, where she called into question the fans holding Lucasfilm under this microscope that other production companies don't, that they don't with other production companies. And to me, it all comes down to their announcements and their brand of PR. And so, yes, this might be commonplace, but what's not commonplace is to throw a damn parade about a project that you're having, that might happen before it even sees the light of day. You need to save that for when you've got something to show. And these people, Kathleen Kennedy in particular, wants to get the fans, and really what I think it is, the stockholders, excited about these projects before they're even remotely ready to be talked about. And there's also, I think, a bit of this Lucasfilm, and I know it goes back, I know culturally it goes back to David Prowse and the leaking of the I Am Your Father and all of that. But I don't know any production company that is more paranoid about press and leaks and people finding out things than Lucasfilm. And I think that it works against them. I think, we heard about the confiscation of the phones and people having to kill their social media channels during the production of the sequel trilogy. It was Anthony Daniels will talk about how insane and over the top it was. But yet, it'd be one thing if all of those efforts led to this incredible rollout, unmatched, this perfect rollout. But it always comes out clumsy and awkward and amidst all kinds of commotion. So despite their best efforts to keep everything so pure and clean, a lot of times it's botched anyway.
I just think it's very telling that George included the pressure that the fans put on Lucasfilm in that interview. And sure, the scrutiny that we put on Lucasfilm because they make announcements that never see the light of day, that is one thing. But I think it's telling that they always seem to reveal this attitude about the fan base and being intimidated by the fan base in such a way that's coming up more and more lately. And I think that reveals an attitude at Lucasfilm. And to me, the way I interpret that attitude is they are out of touch with the fan base, by and large. Now, you could always say, well, how do you put your finger on the pulse of what all fans want? That's impossible. Some fans want this. Some fans want that. But I think there's an overriding feeling amongst Star Wars fans about maintaining the integrity of the stories from which have come before and maintaining the integrity of the history of Star Wars, which I think gets lost on Lucasfilm. So that to me reveals sort of like the vibe in the hallways there. And the vibe to me says they're intimidated by the fans because they don't understand the fans.
But here's the danger. Does that intimidation start to bleed into or evolve into some kind of resentment? If you are scared of your audience, so that's the next step. Anger leads to fear, fear leads to hate leads to suffering. So intimidation leads to resentment leads to hatred. That's a big problem. And you may have just kind of stumbled on what might be the biggest cultural problem at Lucasfilm. If this is true, because you are right. For a guy like Stephen Knight, who came in and put together a draft or two of a film, all this time later to be in an interview and knowing kind of what his talking points needed to be, and believe me, you don't leave a project not knowing what your talking points are, and for him to volunteer that about the fans, that's telling. That's very telling that was on the tip of his tongue.
Yeah. It sort of reveals a little something about the corporate culture over there and their relation to the fan base, and specifically to the original generation, original trilogy Star Wars fan base. They're intimidated and they don't know what to do because they don't have their finger on the pulse. And we've seen evidence of that time and time again. But so that's what's going on with Stephen Knight. He's not going to be proceeding with the new Jedi Order script, but should the film get made, it's quite possible we'll see many of his concepts and ideas being presented in the story. Now, the other very big factor of these films is Daisy Ridley herself. And Daisy's been keeping herself busy. She's working on a number of film projects, keeping herself busy waiting for that call from Lucasfilm, or heck, even waiting for a script from Lucasfilm. And so she could start ramping up her return as Rey. But she appeared on the Backstage podcast called In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast. And she talks about all things in her career, but she also discusses the challenge of returning to the character of Rey. And let's hear what she has to say about that.
I feel like, honestly, a big challenge feels like it will be going back to something, which, because the first three we did fairly close together in the grand scheme of things. So this has been a long time. Honestly, one of the things is, do I remember how to be Rey? So that feels like a challenge because it's been a while and because time has passed in that world. So all of the questions of what has happened in the time, both for me and for the character. So that in and of itself feels like a challenge. Can I do it? And then I think with all things, working with different actors, different filmmakers brings up different things. And that is always progressive, I suppose, because it's someone else's interpretation. It's a different writer, it's a different director, all of those. There are so many different approaches when it's a different team that I feel like it will already be a challenge. And really filling in those moments and figuring out, coming back to something, how to bridge the two, the previous and this, because it's a long time. So I suppose that will be, it already feels like a challenge. An exciting one, a great one, but it already does.
So you got to imagine if you're Daisy Ridley, and she talks about how it's possible to have all the elements there. And I think she's, at least in terms of Star Wars, I think she's looked at it from both sides. The incredible success, the fan fury and love that came out of The Force Awakens, and then she saw the other side of it. She saw a fandom that was disappointed. She saw a fandom that sort of saw her generation of characters coming in as the destructors of the things that a lot of the fans considered the foundation of Star Wars. So, I mean, she really, her perspective is huge. And yet at the same time, she talks about how it's still very, very nerve-wracking because you don't know what you're gonna get in terms of other actors, in terms of other creatives, directors, etc. But I feel like she's already lived this. She's already done this and seen both sides. So to me, it doesn't feel like this would be any different for her. Although, I suppose if you look at the fact that there was an ensemble with her and Oscar Isaac and John Boyega, she's not talking about that. She's talking about it being all different. So maybe that security that she formed with those other actors, maybe that's a little intimidating that's not there. But in terms of it just being different creatives and having all the elements for potential success there, I don't know. It just feels like, gosh, Daisy, you've been through this 3 times already. What's another one?
Well, I think she's looking at it as almost like a second chance in a way to take another shot at Rey and create something that will not only hit the nail on the head a little bit more than the sequels did, but enhance the work she's already done in the sequels, which is an interesting opportunity, I think, for an actor. And a lot of people were providing us feedback about a conversation we recently had about the potential of the sequels actually growing in favor as far as the fan base goes as time goes on, kind of similar to what we've seen with the prequels, and shutting us down for even mentioning that concept, that the sequels will never be anything worthy. And I understand where they're coming from, but also there is an opportunity to create new stories that will then enhance the sequel stories and make it all seem a little bit more concise. And for Daisy to return to the role after all this time too, she's had vastly different experiences in many other films. So
yeah,
even though it's familiar territory, it might feel like a big left turn for her to suddenly be thrown back into the role of Rey, because she has grown as an actress. and based on her experience and, just maturing as a human being, it could present a very different type of character. And to reinvent yourself and reinvent a character that you played 10, 12 years ago, I think that presents a unique challenge in itself.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And she was surrounded by actors like Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill, who were stepping back into roles. Now, obviously, much bigger gap of time, but she was definitely aware of the actor's journey as it was playing out for Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, and what it was like for them to what inevitably was saying goodbye to these characters that they inhabited and were so well identified. So who knows? Maybe that's playing into her head. It's only 12 years or 10 years or whatever it's been. But that, she may have experienced through them what it's like and the pressures of stepping into these roles one more time.
Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. So there's a lot of pressure on Daisy's shoulders as she returns to Rey. Let's see if it all pays off, I certainly like Daisy Ridley a lot, and I wouldn't mind seeing her return to the role, as I've said many times here on this show. And I appreciate the fact that Lucasfilm is taking their time with it. They're just not farting it out to create content, but it appears they're actually trying to develop a story.
Yeah.
And not just wing it like they did with the sequel trilogy. So
we got to make the release date no matter what.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, this could open up the door to a whole future of different Rey films and, surrounded with other characters that we like as well. Yeah. Maybe not necessarily exclusive to the sequel trilogy. We could see other well-known characters. Obviously Chewbacca is evergreen. You can keep Chewbacca in front of cameras till the end of time. Same with R2 and 3PO. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it all goes down. But I am very open-minded about the Daisy Ridley return as Rey. I don't have that kind of confidence when it comes to Charmin Obaid-Chinoy because she's a real what-if factor. She's a real mystery. We don't know much about her, and she seems to be very unproven. So I'm a little nervous in that regard. But I am relieved and feeling a little confident that there is great care being taken with developing this particular project. So maybe it'll see the light of day. So we have we have Star Wars Underworld, which will never see the light of day from what we understand when Rick McCallum and Ron Moore talk about it. We have the new Jedi Order film, which might happen with Daisy Ridley. So let's go back to a Star Wars project that will never see the light of day and is actually fully produced. I mean, episodes they could put on the air tomorrow.
Right.
Star Wars Detours.
Jim, let's take, for those that are new and aren't familiar with this Star Wars Detours, let's just take a quick moment and look back at the show, just a clip of the show, so that listeners and watchers can get an idea of what it is exactly we're talking about. So this is a clip of Star Wars Detours.
Okay, conference. Who should I take to the prom? Todd is toads, double plus cute. No, Maya. My fake dad might approve of him. What about Kip? Yeah. I should totes date Kip. Kip's actually my boyfriend.
Cracknels for the ladies.
Awesome. Oh, I'm allergic to pepper. I'll just have water.
I've been serving Princess Leia these same cracknels since she was knee-high to a pig stinker.
Hello, don't say pig stinker. Yeah, that's culturally insensitive. Yeah, they're Ugnaughts now.
Yeah, emphasis on the...
now.
So, yeah. I mean, the humor, a lot of the humor really does still hold up. But they were really going for some wackiness. So you didn't just have Leia, you had Leia. She was, had these sisters, that surrounded her, and they were not respecting the canon. This was in the style of The Simpsons, Family Guy, Robot Chicken, where you take these characters and you kind of throw them all in a bowl and shake it up and see what happens and play it for laughs. That's what I really think this was trying to do. And part of me thinks it's a real shame. It depends on what clip I'm looking at. Sometimes I go between it's a real shame that we didn't get this, and sometimes I think, maybe it was for the best.
Well, we were there front row at Star Wars Celebration 2012 when Seth Green and George Lucas were on stage presenting the show, letting us know it was ready to go. It was just merely finding a distributor, and we're off to the races. And shortly after that, George sold the company. So bada bing, bada boom. But that's Star Wars Detours. And that particular scene was a scene in Dex's diner with Leia, and it appeared she had some sisters with her or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what was going on there with that, but apparently Leia had some sisters we didn't know about, which is kind of interesting because I swear I only saw Padme give birth to one girl, but hey, maybe it was clones. I don't know. This is Star Wars, for crying out loud. Well, Seth Green, the guy behind this whole project, the guy who worked with George Lucas and developed the whole show, they shot the whole thing, produced the entire series. He recently talked to comicbook.com about the unreleased animated series and explains why it remains on the shelf.
It's so complicated, right? Because where that fit into Star Wars history was a very specific moment. George had not sold the company yet. There weren't concrete plans to make any new Star Wars movies. And Lucasfilm was primarily like a licensing company, separate from the films they'd already produced, the projects that they hadn't developed. George wanted to make something that was The Simpsons in the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we set out to do. I don't know. I think he just wanted to have fun. I really think that's why he hired us. They were writing the last couple seasons of Clone Wars. They were planning what would become Rebels. And we were just making this show up there. And then when he put Kathleen Kennedy in charge, her task was not to make Star Wars for the next 2 years or 3 years. Her task was to embed Star Wars in the populace for the next 30 years. And the biggest thing that she said was, hey, look, we're going to make these new movies and kids have not seen any new Star Wars. So aside from the animated series Clone Wars, this could be a whole new generation's first blush with Star Wars. She said it's more valuable for us to point everything towards the movie. And so the idea that on Detours, we've got Vader in his Life Day sweater hosting a Life Day for all the imprisoned Wookiees in the detention center. It competes, I don't know. You're going to alter the way that you meet these icons, which I agreed, at least for the purpose of pointing everything towards these movies, is valid. Detours itself, I think, would have to be edited, upgraded. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They'd have to do new work on it to make it possible to put it on streaming. And I just don't think that they're willing to commit the spend to, update and release this when they can't see a clear benefit.
Okay.
Yeah. I was glad that they threw some clips in there. So if you're watching the all access version through Patreon, you saw that there were some clips, and there were a few that I just don't remember. It's just been so long. I didn't remember Han Solo grabbing the Indiana Jones hat and putting it on and things like that. And as Seth says, this was George wanting to do Simpsons in the Star Wars universe, and he wanted to have fun with it. I don't know what Kathleen Kennedy told Seth Green and the producers of the show about, well, you got to understand that this is the first time for some people, some kids, this is going to be their first time being exposed to these characters, and we want it done right, and we have to be pointing everything in the direction of the new movie. Not really buying it. I'm not really buying it. That, to me, that assumes, I wish I could. I wish I could say, wow, this is the hallmark of a CEO that has a lock solid strategy. knows what her mandate is, knows how she's going to accomplish it, knows this, knows that. There is absolutely nothing in Kathleen Kennedy's tenure as CEO of Lucasfilm that leads me to believe that she has ever had that level of clarity, that level of direction. I think that this could have just come down simply to the fact that they were going to be making some changes to continuity, and this series was making jokes about things that were going to be rendered null and void. I think that's one of the biggest problems, and it might have just come down to taste. Have you seen, outside of Lego, Disney do anything along these same lines? This type of humor, the Adult Swim, what was the name of the show that Seth did before? Robot Chicken. That style of humor? I haven't. So I don't think this just fit their brand. That's what I think it came down to. And Seth Green and his and Matt Senreich and the gang there that was surrounding George and George himself, I think they needed to be given a line that was showing respect for the work that they did, and that's the line that they got. But I'm not buying it. I think it just comes down to they didn't like it. It wasn't to their taste, and it didn't fit their brand. I think the fans would have loved it, honestly.
You know, there could have been a lot of expanded universe references going on in the show, too. And as we know, Lucasfilm famously blew up the old expanded universe back in 2014.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that could have presented some real issues with some of the ideas being presented in that show.
Well, we know Seth and his crew love to tease George about the expanded universe.
And Mara Jade specifically.
So, yeah, I would imagine that any chance they got to throw in a little gag, little joke that they thought might, in a humorous way rankle George a bit, they would have done it. That's a good point about the EU stuff in there, for sure.
Yeah. So, I do look at those Lego shows, though, as something which presents Star Wars characters in really silly, goofy situations. And obviously that's targeting kids. So could those shows be presenting the characters to kids for the very first time? I remember the first time my son Dylan watched the trilogy, the original trilogy. He did it all on his own, too. I was so proud of him. He was a little kid. He was like 4 or 5. And I found him in his room, on the floor with his hands back, behind his head, watching, really engrossed in Star Wars. And longtime listeners will remember I had an exit interview with Dylan after he had completed the trilogy and just asked him about key moments in the original trilogy, specifically about Darth Vader's reveal to Luke, the I am your father reveal. And I said, how did that, what kind of impact did that have on you? What did you think about all that? Were you blown away? He's like, I don't know. I saw that coming from a mile away. I said, how could you see that coming? Robot Chicken. Oh, okay. So you can see that, sometimes these kids are being introduced to the characters in really wacky ways. And in that sort of scenario with Dylan, it almost validates the decision to put Detours on the shelf for a little while, especially as they were rolling out the sequel trilogy and being so precious about it at the same time. But it wasn't only Star Wars Detours. We also know that things at Walt Disney, at Disney World, were being shut down, like the Hyperspace Hoopla, which featured main Star Wars characters dancing like Michael Jackson on stage, and DJ Lobot and all that nonsense that was going on.
The mashups, too, Jim. Remember where they would have like Daffy Duck as Han Solo, Jedi Mickey, those things. That was also kiboshed.
I miss Jedi Mickey. I really do. I enjoyed that Jedi Mickey to no end,
That's some great action figures, too, at that time.
I have a Jedi Mickey action figure, and I consider it to be 100% canon. So I could see him sitting there at the Jedi Council in a meeting, Oh, gee, I think I sense the dark side. Oh. So like, as we heard from Ron Moore, as we heard from Stephen Knight. They're just happy with the experience of working on Star Wars, even though their stories never got to be told. And here Seth reiterates that sort of attitude.
I am consoled by the insane and unlikely experience that I got to have with one of my greatest influences. There's so many things you create that never get made. There's so many things that you make that never get seen. It is a painful reality of being in this business. I look at all the people that I know, the work I got to do, this insane experience I got to have. I've learned so much just from getting to do it about everything. Getting to spend that time in tutelage by Kathleen Kennedy, it's an honor.
An honor. All right. Well, certainly to be able to hang out and write a TV show with George Lucas about his characters and in a fun way, a funny way, and getting George to let his hair down. I mean, what an experience. Seth could write a book for me about he should write a book called Star Wars Detours. I just want to hear more about what it was like to put George in that situation. That's a side of George we don't normally get to see. And remember, he was also, I think, trying to impress his kids during that period of time because of how popular that stuff was, and with the Family Guy and The Simpsons and Phineas and Ferb and all of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Family Guy. Yeah, that was really the golden age of Star Wars parodies right there. It was happening constantly. And I was beginning to fear that was the future of Star Wars. When it came to Detours, I was like, well, wait a second now. We had heard news that the Clone Wars had a few seasons left at that time, and Detours was on the horizon. But we were thinking to ourselves, all right, well, what's after Detour? I mean, is that going to be, is that where Star Wars is going to place its flag for the next generation? Is purely within the... And we even heard stories from certain insiders who were saying things like George Lucas's children were on his butt to do something with Star Wars, even beyond the parodies and stuff.
Right.
And not let the franchise die on the vine. George was saying in interviews, nobody's going to be making Star Wars after I'm dead and gone. It's going to die with me, is essentially what George was saying. And then Disney came ringing the bell, and the dollar signs in George's eyes were just too much to deny. And I think Melody Hobson also was pressuring George to get top dollar for the franchise at that time and settle down with her and start a family. I mean, all us guys go through that. All us married guys have been through that. Or they make you sell all of your toys and things like that. And, what you have left, you put in your man cave. And that's exactly what's going on with George in the museum. The museum is George's Star Wars man cave. It's all he has left.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, though, because they're going to pull all that stuff out of the archive building on Skywalker Ranch and load up the museum with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're not going to take everything out of the archives, but they're going to take all the good stuff. You have that Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, sitting in there in the under a blanket in the barn that houses the archives. No, that does nobody any good there. Put it on display. Yeah. And so that's what George is going to do, and I'm really looking forward to that. So, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be looking forward to Star Wars Detours, or fortunately, it might have been
it's easy to say now because we're living in this time where we've got so much Star Wars content that I can sit here and say, I've got this big buffet. Yeah, you know what? Give me a helping of the Star Wars Detours as I'm filling my plate up. It's easy to say that now. But you're right to remind that when that was what we were seeing as the future of Star Wars, and it wasn't a buffet, it was just one meal that they were, slopping up and throwing it on your plate. That was all we were going to get. It was a lot different back then. But all these years later, I look at something like Detours and I go, yeah, I might like to have a little bit of that for dessert.
I just don't think the after shows would have been all that compelling. That's all.
Well, that's for sure. I don't think
it probably would have been a very tiresome process at the same time. So,
right.
Oh well. So that's what's up with that. Well, we have time, Jason. I think we have time for one quick Star Wars in pop culture, and I definitely want to take advantage of it this week.
Rebel Force Radio.
You've already made that Star Wars reference.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars parody!
Yeah, Star Wars and pop culture, where we look at references and influences had by Star Wars outside of the galaxy far, far away.
Yes, we do. And this week, this is a Star Wars and pop culture segment that's really inspired by the latest episode of The Babu Freaks at RFR on Patreon. We started to discuss the passing of actor George Lowe. George voiced superhero turned talk show host Space Ghost on Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which was a show on the Cartoon Network for a number of years. 11 seasons it ran. And the show reimagined the Space Ghost character from the 60s and turned him into a late night talk show host on the Cartoon Network. And they say that this show is really kind of what was the spark that led to the creation of Adult Swim, was Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
I remember this show so well, and the first time I saw it, I was... Because I grew up watching the Space Ghost reruns, you know, the proper Space Ghost, the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and all of a sudden I turn on the TV and hear Space Ghost, and he's sitting at a desk, you know, like Johnny Carson, like David Letterman, like Jimmy Fallon for you kids. And there was something about the way the editing was, because Space Ghost was animated and he would have live action guests, and they would do these pauses in between the question and the answer that just made it so much funnier than it really was. It was all played for laughs. But the ultimate straight man, George Lowe as Space Ghost, the ultimate straight man, took himself and the character, played the character as he took himself very, very seriously, which also made it so damn funny.
And George also, took on the role from the original voice, Gary Owen, from back in the day, very well-known deep voice announcer guy, and really made the character his own. And the Space Ghost Coast to Coast show aired from 94 until 2012. And George Lowe unfortunately passed away last week at the age of 67.
Oh, wow. Well, he wasn't that old.
No. He challenging recovery after undergoing heart surgery in November.
What a shame.
Sad.
Great voice. Great voice. Super funny.
Yeah. But we have clips. Everybody's like, well, what's the Star Wars connection here? It's got to be more than just space.
That's true.
Space Ghost, Star Wars. No. Star Wars legend Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill appeared on the show. And from what Babu Freak Barry Harmon tells me, that you can't really find this episode for streaming anywhere. So Barry dug into his archives and presented me with some clips that I want to play for you guys. Space Ghost, Coast to Coast with Mark Hamill. This is from 1997. So Mark wasn't really all that present, like in the nerd scene back then. He wasn't gearing up to play Luke Skywalker again or anything like that.
No, he kept Star Wars sort of at arm's length, to be honest. And was this during the Black Pearl era when he was looking to make a film out of the comic book that he wrote?
Yeah, I think it's maybe even a little prior to that, or around the same time, I guess. I'm trying to remember. I think Wendy Snyder interviewed Mark Hamill during that Black Pearl era because I have the comic book. And I know she gave it to me, so I think it was around that time, but not 100% sure. But that's irrelevant, doesn't matter. Let's get into the clip. Jason said the show was kind of crazy, Space Ghost Coast to Coast, where they take just like interview clips and they mix it in with the animation, and sometimes the two don't exactly sync up. It's really insane. So let's hear from Mark Hamill on Space Ghost.
It's Mark Hamill here.
Whoa! Look who's here, young people. It's none other than Duke Fartknocker.
Luke Skywalker.
Luke Skytopper of the popular Space Wars science fiction mega empire franchise.
I think it's much more along the lines of a fairy tale than it is straightforward science fiction.
Whatever, Professor. How's Chewie?
Chewie? Well, you know,
you and me both. But seriously, Mark, was it scary working with Lord Vader?
James Earl Jones is just such a gifted person. And
Prowse.
Huh?
David Prowse. He played Vader in the movie version, not Jones.
Maybe I said a dirty word.
Oh, you did, pal.
David Prowse? Are you joking? If this is a joke, I'm not laughing.
Prowse is the true Lord Vader.
Prowse? He was a figurehead. It is Jones who is the true Vader.
Answer me this, Moltar. Who patrolled the galleys of the Death Star?
The Ewoks.
Don't patronize me, Bantha fodder.
Well, if you consulted your handbook, you would know it was the Stormtroopers.
Yes, of course, but who led them, Moltar? Huh? Who led them? Refresh my memory on this one, if you please. Would that be...
Prowse, but
exactly. Exactly, Moltar. That's exactly what I thought.
You know, this only works, as you and I have remarked over the years so many times, about how those actors' names were burned on our brains, from the movie posters to the behind-the-scenes documentaries, all of that. For this to reach the pop culture zeitgeist of the late 90s, mid 90s, whenever this was. And it's a Prowse versus Jones face-off on Space Ghost with Mark Hamill just sort of the monkey in the middle. You know, he's really just not even really contributing to it. It is it's wacky. It is this clip is just kind of typifies everything I loved about that show. So funny.
Yeah. And it's very typical of the Space Ghost coast to coast type of interviews where it's like 15% the interviewee and 85% the cartoon characters debating and arguing with each other. It's just absolutely nuts. We have one more clip.
Wouldn't be interested in a new career as a sidekick, would you?
It beats Ed McMahon.
I must warn you, you would be required to laugh at the outrageously hilarious antics of a talk show in outer space.
Yes, I can do that.
I like your attitude, Hamill. Come in Monday for paperwork.
Yes.
Whoa, save some for the convention, buddy.
Yes.
So what do you do at these conventions? Do you say, show how you ate breakfast on Tatooine? Is it Tatooine?
Oh, me eating cereal would be...
Impressive.
This is just sad.
That's amazing, Mark. Would you bring your imaginary bowl of cereal to my convention?
That'd be great. If I'm in your galaxy, I'll stop on by.
Great. Then I'll see you at Space Ghost Con 97.
Thank you so much for having me.
I don't know. He sounded iffy.
That's not the Luke Skytopper I know.
A lot of people don't know this, but me and Jason Swank actually met each other at Space Ghost Expo 97 or whatever that was. That's where we met each other. Most people don't know this.
Oh, man, the time flies. Wow, that's great. Yeah. Thanks to Barry for bringing that up. And sad to see the passing of George Lowe, super talented guy. Did a lot of the voices across some of the, like, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, and he also did a spinoff of with the Brack Show. That was a spinoff of Coast to Coast when Brack decided he couldn't stay under the wing of Space Ghost, and so he branched out and had his own show. But anyway, well,
amazing.
Rest in peace, George Lowe, and boy, a very Luke Skywalker looking Mark Hamill all the way back then in the mid 90s.
Yeah, he was only 15 years removed from the role, and still maintaining all of the youthful, boyish charm of Luke Skywalker. So, but not doing really conventions back in that day.
No.
They make reference to it, but Mark wasn't really a presence on the convention scene until, the latter part of the early 2000s.
Right.
Yeah. So, but if you do see Mark Hamill at a convention, take him a bowl of cereal, see what happens.
Chewie, get us out of here!
Oh, and there you have it, folks. Another episode of Rebel Force Radio in the can. If you'd like to get more Rebel Force Radio in your life, and the weekly show just ain't enough, you can get lots more at Patreon, patreon.com/Rebel Force Radio, that is, including weekly full show videos of this very podcast that you're listening to right now. So as we're talking about Space Ghost Coast to Coast, you can be watching the clip with us. And if that's not enough, there's exclusive podcasts that you can't find anywhere else, original content, only available on Patreon when you support us here at Rebel Force Radio. In addition to those exclusive podcasts, you get to hang out with other like-minded Star Wars fans as yourself. And it's a great community of Star Wars fans, really the best, I think, that you can find anywhere online. So please check it out, Rebel Force Radio on Patreon. And when we do these live events, which you just heard about at the top of the program, we're going to be doing another live event September 6th at Rancho Obi-Wan 2025. You get all kinds of benefits like early admission, you get first dibs on tickets, all that stuff. So it really does pay to be a member of Patreon for Rebel Force Radio. Thank you so much for all of that. And you can also watch us on YouTube for free. That costs you nothing. We got a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rebel Force Radio. So a lot of our interviews that have been done over the years, lots of highlights from the show. It's a great way just to see do I want to watch these knuckleheads every week and pay for that all access tier? Well, there's plenty of clips and highlights that you can make that judgment all on your very own. We're also on all of the socials. We're on Instagram, we're on X, we're on Facebook. Just search for @Rebel Force Radio, the official website for all things and everything, Rebel Force Radio, rebelforceradio.com. That's really the hub. That tells you everything that you need to know. Will be, as soon as more ticket information for the big event at Rancho Obi-Wan in the fall is announced, it'll be on the website. It'll be on all the socials. But that's the one place you can make sure that you can catch all of the latest news about Rebel Force Radio. But the best way to help us out, the way that really does make the biggest difference, and that's just to do what you're doing right now, which is keep listening to the show each and every week. We love seeing those numbers grow. It's just been a phenomenal ride all these many years, and the fact that you're still with us each and every week, listening to us talk about Star Wars. And I don't just mean us, as in me and Jimmy Mack. I mean all of us, the community of Rebel Force Radio listeners, talking together and enjoying this thing and discussing it as we do each and every week. It's just awesome. So we never take it for granted. We don't take you for granted. So thank you so much. Please keep listening. Recommend the show to your friends, your family, the Star Wars fan in your life that might have not heard of Rebel Force Radio. Please let them know all about us. And if your podcatcher of choice allows you to do so, we'd love to have you subscribe. We'd love to have you leave us a review. Please leave us a review. Just one simple rule, please.
Make them good.
All right, that'll do it for us. We'll see you here next week for more Rebel Force Radio. But until then, for RFR, I'm Jason.
I'm Jimmy Mack.
And remember,
The Force will be with you, always.
Whoa! Look who's here, young people. It's none other than Duke Fartknocker.